The wallet looked expensive on purpose. That was the point. A thick black leather fold with a subtle shine, placed just barely out of sight near the gum display at Register 3. Close enough for temptation, far enough to pretend it was an accident. The billionaire who left it there didn't forget anything. He watched from the corner like a man studying an experiment, convinced he already knew the result. He believed honesty was something you could measure in other people the way you measured risk in markets. He believed a black cashier in a struggling neighborhood would fail his little test, and that his suspicion would be proven right. He didn't know two things. First, the cashier had integrity he couldn't afford. Second, the cashier could see through him so fast it made him feel stupid. And when he realized what his test had nearly triggered, what it could have cost her, he regretted it with a speed that shocked even him. Alyssa Monroe was 23, black, and tired in the specific way people get tired when they've been responsible since childhood. She worked mornings at Northgate Market, a small grocery store on the edge of a gentrifying district, then took night classes in accounting because she wanted a job where the numbers were the hard part, not the way people looked at her before she spoke. Alyssa had a calm face, warm eyes, and a voice that stayed steady even when customers got rude. That steadiness wasn't natural, it was trained. Her mother used to say, "Keep your tone gentle. They don't let you be angry." Alyssa learned early that being black and female meant you could be blamed for the weather if the right person decided you looked like a problem. She lived with her aunt and her little cousin. Her dad had been in and out of her life like a bad signal, present enough to disappoint, absent enough to ache. Her mom had passed when Alyssa was 17, leaving her with grief and a set of bills that didn't pause for mourning. Since then, Alyssa measured life in shifts and receipts, in careful budgets and quiet sacrifices. She didn't steal because she didn't want to. She didn't steal because she couldn't afford the consequences, even if she did. One accusation could follow her forever. One mistake could derail her degree, her job, her future. In neighborhoods like hers, people didn't get benefit of the doubt. They got handcuffs. That afternoon, the store was busy in the ordinary way. Parents buying snacks, seniors buying medicine, teenagers grabbing energy drinks and chips. The air smelled like oranges and cleaning solution. Alyssa stood behind Register 3 scanning items with practiced speed. Beep, slide, bag, next. Her manager, Mrs. Patel, an older Indian woman with sharp eyes and a kind heart, trusted Alyssa more than anyone on the floor because Alyssa didn't cut corners. Mrs. Patel also knew the neighborhood was changing. New faces, new money, new entitlement. People who walked into Northgate Market like they were touring local flavor and expected staff to be grateful for their presence. That's why Alyssa noticed him the moment he entered. He didn't belong, not because he was rich, but because he moved like he was used to being obeyed. White, early 40s, tailored jacket that didn't match the store, watch glinting, eyes scanning the aisles like he was judging the place rather than shopping in it. He wasn't browsing with curiosity. He was observing with distance. Two men followed him, also white, dressed casual but too alert, the kind of casual that was actually security. The store's energy shifted subtly. People glanced, a couple employees straightened. Alyssa kept scanning, but her attention sharpened. She had learned to read people the way cashiers learn to read counterfeit bills, by feel, by pattern, by tiny cues. The man picked up a few items he didn't need: bottled water, a granola bar, a pack of gum, and walked toward Alyssa's register as if he had chosen it intentionally. His two security men didn't line up. They stood off to the side, watching. That alone was weird. Regular customers didn't bring observers. He stepped up, smiled faintly, and placed the items on the counter. Alyssa greeted him the way she greeted everyone. "Hi, did you find everything okay?" He nodded, eyes drifting over her name tag. Alyssa, he read out loud, like tasting it. Yes? She scanned the water. Beep. The gum. Beep. The granola bar. Beep. Total came to $6.72. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wallet, the kind that looked more like a status symbol than a tool. He peeled off a crisp 20, handed it to her, and watched her hands as she put it in the drawer. Not casually. Watching. Alyssa noticed. Her gut tightened, but her face stayed calm. She counted back change precisely. 13, 14, 15, and coins, then handed it to him. He didn't take it immediately. He looked at her, then at the money, then back at her. You're quick, he said. Just doing my job, Alyssa replied politely. He smiled, a little too pleased. Then he took the change, gathered his items, and turned to leave. As he turned, he accidentally set the wallet down on the gum display next to the register, half hidden by a cardboard promotional stand. Alyssa saw the motion clearly. It wasn't a drop. It was a placement. He walked away slowly, not like a man who forgot something important, but like a man giving someone time to do what he expected. His security men drifted with him, taking positions where they could watch Alyssa without looking like they were watching. Alyssa stared at the wallet for 1 second. Then she looked up and saw his head tilt slightly, as if he was waiting. She felt a flare of anger. Hot, sharp, immediate. Not at the wallet, at the game. Because she knew what this was. She'd seen versions of it before. People leaving small items, watching to see if she stole. Customers forgetting cash on the counter, and then turning back with suspicious eyes. People who wanted to confirm a bias they already held. But this one felt bigger. The wallet looked like a trap, and traps don't just test you, they threaten you. If she touched it wrong, if a camera angle made it look like she pocketed it, if his security decided to misinterpret, Alyssa could lose her job. Or worse. Her hands stayed exactly where they belonged, visible on the counter. She didn't reach for the wallet, she didn't hide it, she didn't even move it. Instead, she pressed the store intercom button and said calmly, "Manager to register 3 for a lost item." Her voice stayed professional, but her eyes stayed on the man. He paused near the produce section, pretending to look at apples. His security watched Alyssa like hawks. Mrs. Patel arrived quickly. "What is it?" she asked. Alyssa nodded toward the wallet without touching it. "That customer left his wallet here," she said evenly. Mrs. Patel frowned, then picked it up carefully. "Okay," she said. She looked toward the man. Alyssa spoke softly, just for her manager. "He didn't forget it," she whispered. "He placed it." Mrs. Patel's eyes narrowed slightly. She wasn't naive. "Stay here," she murmured. Mrs. Patel walked toward the man holding the wallet in both hands like evidence. "Sir," she called out, "you left this?" The man turned slowly, as if surprised, but his eyes were bright with anticipation. "Oh," he said, performing. "My wallet, thank you." Mrs. Patel held it out. "Of course," she said, polite. "Please, be careful." The man took the wallet, but instead of leaving, he smiled and said loudly enough for Alyssa to hear, "That was impressive." Mrs. Patel's expression tightened. "Excuse me?" He glanced back toward Alyssa. "Your cashier," he said. She didn't even hesitate. "Honest." Alyssa's cheeks warmed, not with pride, with fury. He said it like he'd awarded her something. Mrs. Patel's eyes hardened. "Why wouldn't she be honest?" she asked. The man chuckled lightly. "You never know these days," he said, casual cruelty wrapped in humor. "I like to see who people really are." Alyssa felt the air leave her chest. There it was. The assumption said out loud. The implication that dishonesty was expected, especially from someone like her. Mrs. Patel's voice cooled. "Sir," she said, "we don't appreciate customers setting traps for our employees." The man's smile faltered. just slightly. Trap? He repeated, as if amused. It was just a test. Alyssa stepped out from behind the register. Her hands were still visible. Her voice was calm, but it carried. A test can ruin someone's life, she said. The store quieted. A few customers slowed, listening. The man turned fully toward her now, curiosity sharpening. Ruin? He said. If you're honest, there's nothing to fear. Alyssa's eyes locked on him. That's not true, she said evenly, because people don't need proof to accuse. They need a story, and you were trying to create one. His security men shifted subtly, uncomfortable. The man's expression changed, irritation mixing with surprise. Who are you to lecture me? He asked. Alyssa didn't flinch. I'm the person you decided to suspect, she said, without knowing anything about me. The man's jaw tightened. It's not personal, he said, defensive. Alyssa's voice stayed steady. It always is, she replied. For the first time, the billionaire looked slightly off balance, not because Alyssa had yelled, but because she hadn't. She had named the truth calmly, and calm truth is hard to dismiss. He glanced around, noticing eyes on him now. A teenager near the chips aisle had pulled out a phone. A mom near the milk section was staring. Mrs. Patel stood with arms folded, unimpressed. The man cleared his throat and tried to regain control with charm. I'm sorry if it came across wrong, he said. I just believe honesty matters. Alyssa nodded once. Then start with yours, she said. You didn't forget the wallet. Silence hit. The man's face flushed. Fine, he said, annoyed. I didn't forget it. I left it to see what would happen. Alyssa's voice stayed calm. Why? She asked. He hesitated. And that hesitation, tiny, was the most honest thing he'd done so far. Then he said it, because people like him always think the room will agree. Because stores like this get robbed, he said. Because you never know. Alyssa's eyes sharpened. You mean because I'm black, she said plainly. The billionaire's mouth opened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Alyssa replied. Your assumptions said it for you. Mrs. Patel's voice cut in, firm. Sir, you need to leave, she said. Now. The billionaire blinked. Excuse me? He snapped, offended that someone in a small grocery store would speak to him like that. Mrs. Patel held his gaze. You disrupted my store and harassed my employee, she said. Leave. He looked around, as if expecting people to recognize him and intervene. Do you know who I am? He asked, voice sharper. Alyssa didn't smile. You're someone with money who thinks it makes you judge and jury, she said. The billionaire stared at her. For a moment, something shifted. Anger battling shame. His security men looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them. Then, because he couldn't handle being challenged by a cashier in public, he did the one thing powerful people do when they feel exposed. He reached for consequences. I could buy this place, he said coldly, looking at Mrs. Patel, then at Alyssa. And I could fire you. Alyssa's stomach turned, but her face stayed calm. Then you'd still be wrong, she said. Mrs. Patel stepped closer, voice ice. Sir, she said, if you don't leave, I'm calling the police. The billionaire scoffed. Call them, he said, confident. Alyssa's eyes narrowed slightly. We already have cameras, she said, and if police come, they'll see you admitted you set a trap. That sentence landed differently, because suddenly the billionaire realized his game created evidence, not against Alyssa, against him. His jaw tightened. He glanced at his security men. They didn't look confident anymore. He exhaled sharply. Forget it, he muttered, and turned to leave. As he walked toward the doors, a woman near the registers called out, Shame on you! Another customer muttered, Rich people are sick. A teenager whispered, He really thought he did something. The billionaire's shoulders stiffened. At the doors, he stopped and turned back one last time, eyes locked on Alyssa. "You think you won?" he asked, voice low. Alyssa met his gaze. "No," she said quietly. "I think you lost." Then he left. For a moment, the store was quiet. Alyssa's hands shook slightly now that the adrenaline released. Mrs. Patel touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" she asked. Alyssa nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah," she said. "I'm just tired." Mrs. Patel's eyes were kind and fierce. "You did good," she said. Alyssa looked down at her hands. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I just didn't pick up his wallet." Mrs. Patel shook her head. "No," she said. "You stood up for yourself. That's different." That should have been the end. But the billionaire regretted it fast. Faster than Alyssa expected, because he didn't realize what his little test had nearly triggered until later that day. 2 hours after the incident, a police officer actually did show up at Northgate Market. Not because Mrs. Patel called, but because the billionaire did. He filed a suspicious behavior report, claiming a cashier had acted strange and that he felt unsafe. He didn't accuse Alyssa of theft directly, but he planted the seed. The same seed he'd tried to grow with the wallet. The officer walked in, asked questions, and Mrs. Patel's face hardened. She pulled security footage immediately. Video showing the billionaire placing the wallet down deliberately, then waiting, then admitting it was a test. The officer watched silently, expression shifting. "That's not how this works," the officer muttered. Mrs. Patel folded her arms. "Exactly," she said. "So you can close your report." The officer nodded slowly. "I will," he said. Then he looked at Alyssa, and his eyes held a rare apology. "Sorry you had to deal with that," he said. Alyssa nodded once, but she didn't smile, because she knew how close she'd come to being turned into a problem by someone who wanted to protect his ego. That night, Alyssa sat at her kitchen table doing homework, pencil tapping. Her cousin slept in the next room. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. A message. "This is Everett Caldwell. We met at Northgate Market today." Alyssa stared at the name. She didn't recognize it. Then she remembered the man's watch, his posture, his entitlement. Everett Caldwell, billionaire. She'd seen his face in magazines before, maybe on a top entrepreneurs list someone had posted online. She hadn't cared enough to remember. Another message came. "I owe you an apology, a real one." Alyssa stared, skeptical. Then, "My test was wrong. Not because you passed it, but because I ran it." Alyssa's chest tightened. She typed back, "Why are you texting me?" A pause. Then, "Because I realized my test could have gotten you fired. Or worse. And I can't unlearn that." Alyssa read it twice. She didn't know if it was guilt or PR. Probably both. But something in the words felt less polished than he'd sounded in the store. He sent another message. "I want to make it right, not with money, with accountability." Alyssa stared, thinking of how people like him always tried to buy their way out. She replied, "Accountability would be you admitting what you did publicly, not privately." Long pause. Then, "You're right. Will you allow me to speak to your manager and apologize in person tomorrow? On camera, if needed." Alyssa considered. Then she typed, "Talk to Mrs. Patel, not me. I'm not your redemption story." The next morning, Everett Caldwell returned to the store, without security. He looked less confident, more human. Mrs. Patel didn't smile. Alyssa watched from behind the counter, heart steady. Everett stood in front of the register and said, loud enough for staff and customers to hear, "Yesterday, I set a trap for your cashier because of assumptions I didn't want to admit I had. That was wrong. I apologize." He turned to Alyssa, eyes lowered slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, and for once it sounded like he meant it. Mrs. Patel's gaze stayed sharp. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked. Everett nodded slowly. "I'm going to fund an employee legal defense fund for this community," he said, "not through my name on a billboard. Quietly, through a local nonprofit. And I'm going to require bias training for every manager in my retail portfolio." He paused, "Because I realized yesterday that my money lets me create consequences I don't have to face. That has to change." Alyssa didn't clap. She didn't forgive instantly. But she did something important. She believed in leverage. If a powerful person offered accountability, you took it and you locked it in writing. Mrs. Patel said, "Get it in writing." Everett nodded. "You will," he said. Later, after he left, Alyssa felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, but relief that she hadn't been swallowed by someone else's story. She went back to scanning groceries, beep by beep, building her future quietly. And she promised herself something as she rang up an elderly woman's bread and oranges. She would never let someone's suspicion define her worth. Because the truth is, a billionaire can test your honesty with a wallet. But the real test is what you do when you realize your bias could destroy someone. Everett Caldwell regretted it fast, because for the first time, the consequences weren't theoretical. They had a name tag. They had a life. And she was standing right in front of him.